All right. Thanks again, everyone, for joining in. I hope you and your families are doing well and taking care in these challenging times. And I really appreciate you taking out 30 minutes from your schedule today. I'll start with a quick introduction. My name is Simranjeet Singh, and I work as an account executive at Strongpoint. Like all of you, I'm a trailblazer myself. So prior to Strongpoint, I worked with Salesforce for about 3 years. Completely love the platform and its capabilities. And also joining me, I have Rick Rosler. Rick is a crucial member of our customer success team and brings a lot of Salesforce admin experience with him. So Rick and I together will be the host of the webinar today. And here's a quick agenda of what we will cover over the next 25 minutes or 30 minutes or so. So we'll start with a quick introduction of governance and why it is important. So no matter how small or large your current Salesforce investment or your org is, or no matter where you stand in your growth journey with Salesforce at this point, there's always benefit areas that everyone can take away. And then I will walk you through the 5 foundational processes of lean governance framework. It's something that it's directly recommended by Salesforce. And probably some of you on the call would be familiar with this already, which I would say is great. But I would still encourage you to hold on as we'll cover some of the challenges and gaps within those 5 processes. And towards the end, we'll show you a quick demo of how Strongpoint, as an example, can help you streamline and automate some of those gaps. So we really hope that you find this session meaningful. If there are any questions, please keep posting them in the chat window and we will answer them towards the end. But just before we jump into the topic, I thought I'll start this webinar by sharing a story that a lot of you on the call, I think, would relate to, and a story that I know relates to some of my old Salesforce customers. So please say hi to Chris. Chris is a super admin working for a company that's experiencing hyper growth, and their team of 50 recently implemented Salesforce. Now, Chris over here, he looks very happy. And I'm sure you all must be guessing why. The answer is because whenever Chris gets a request from his business teams, considering their current size and scale of the org, he knows he can work on those requests quickly. So as an example, if the VP of sales requests Chris to make a change to a field on the opportunity object, he can proudly say, I can do that in 2 minutes. Now the team overall is very happy as they are closing more business, which is what I think Salesforce wanted. And everyone loves Chris for his efforts in managing the platform. Now, as we grow and fast forward to a period where I think the platform is now more mature, it's complex, and it's being used by various teams now, and not just sales. And now Chris has a huge list of open, complex change requests coming from different business teams. And he personally is having a tough time managing all of them. And if Chris at this point had a magic wand, I think he would just use it once to complete all of the pending change requests. But the idea is, or maybe the reason, or the point is that this is not a one-time problem. We all know that change in a platform like Salesforce is a continuous process. And so we need, so what we actually need is not a magic wand, but a governing framework for the platform, that kind of unites various business teams, that helps you set processes, policies, and a vision of the platform. So this brings me back to our topic of governance. And first thing first, I thought I'll bring some clarity. So governance is not center of excellence. And it's not the same thing, as a change review board. And also, center of excellence is not just audit. It's actually a lot more. Governance processes need to be in place as a foundation for a center of excellence to function effectively. But just because you don't have a center of excellence does not mean that you don't need governance. These things definitely are connected to each other, but I know that they are 2 separate things. And the second point that I want to clarify is governance is not slow. Now, people think of governance sometimes as being a red tape and related to bureaucracy. We hear comments that I don't want to implement this because I need to run my business. I need time, and this will kind of slow me down. But in reality, when you have a strong governance framework in place, you are so much more effective in managing, your overall org. Now, with this in mind, let's talk about some of the benefits that governance brings to an organization. Now, first of all, it provides a vision for the platform. And this could have different meanings depending on where you stand in your platform journey today. So for someone who is planning to implement Salesforce, a vision could include immediate KPI benefits, that they plan to achieve. Things like increase in sales or increase in profitability. But for someone who's already using the platform, a vision would define where they need to go and how they are going to achieve it. And this is important as a lot of decisions about the platform, like what we do, when, and how do we do it, will need to be related back to that vision. And since we are speaking about vision and making platform decisions, thinking about this is not just a job of one team, right? It requires various teams to come together that are linked to the platform by either using it directly, accessing information in some way, or taking part in the process. So if we do this kind of creates alignment across teams and projects. Now, having a strong governance framework in place can also lead directly to user adoption and overall user satisfaction. So users feel like the platform is kind of meeting their needs. It's responsive, it's trustworthy. And if you follow this, it also creates synergies between different teams. Now, the next point is really important, and I'm going to stress a little on this couple of times today, is this concept of prioritization and velocity. So the idea here is how we can help move things along, really quickly and effectively. So if we have a bunch of open change backlogs, how can we determine which ones to pick first and which ones will add the most value? Last couple of points here. If you're doing all of the things that I just mentioned really well, some quick questions that come to my mind. Do you think you are going to save time? Do you think you are going to use your resources effectively? Do you think that's going to relate back to cost savings? I personally feel it absolutely will. So running a platform like this, using governance absolutely drives down cost. And finally, for those that are interested in stocks, we are increasingly seeing that Salesforce is creeping into the scope for stocks because of the impact on financials and Salesforce being integrated by multiple backend systems, and also it's sometimes because of the environment you operate in, right? So even if SOX is out of scope for you, having a strong governance framework and strong policies in place can really help you meet those requirements. Now, moving on, let's look at the 5 foundational processes of the lean governance framework that Salesforce recommends. And I would just like to stress a little here that this applies to companies of all sizes and different stages. So you don't have to be a massive company to take advantage of these. A lot of times you would want to have them in place really early in your journey so that you benefit the most. And the first one over here is vision and strategy. And it's all about what are you going to do and how are you going to do it. And I touched a little about this on this in my last slide, but a couple of points here. So along with just vision, it is important to also list down your strategies and the strategies that will help you drive this towards your goal. And finally, once you have clarity on this, I think it's also important to define what success looks like. And whenever I speak about this term, I remember my time, from Salesforce. So our customer success team would always encourage our customers to define how they are going to measure success very, very early in the project. And they would actually go into a lot of detail. So if you're building a sales process that starts with a lead, to booking an appointment, and towards the end blocking an inventory, they would urge you to ask yourself as to how are you going to measure whether the process that you've designed is working well or not, or whether the platform is adding value here or not. So taking a new project or implementation without a vision and strategy is like heading into a race without a finish line. So some questions that come to my mind is how do you know who wins or exactly when? Now, The next point here is business backlog. And again, I talked about this a little in my last slide, but I would just continue building on it. I think it's fair to say for everybody on the call today that requirements is greater than resources. And if you add more resources, odds are that your requirements would also, increase. So you really need to prioritize what you deliver to the business, and that should be tied back to your vision and strategy that you put in place. So simple things like speed, efficiency, and fast delivery is important, and all of this often ties back to using some basic things like considering using out-of-the-box functionalities, or using declarative code over declarative development over code, or sometimes even staying up to date on the new releases that Salesforce brings. That also helps a lot. The third point is software development lifecycle. And this is about leveraging best practices, strategy, alignment across different business units and release cadences. Now, it should really be driving down risk, driving down instability, and increasing the overall predictability of delivery result. So as an example, having clarity on what we are going to deliver in our Q2 release, for example, that sort of approach and that sort of clarity within the team is going to drive even better communication internally. It could look complex initially, but yeah, planning it early and planning it well can take you big steps forward. And the same thing goes for data strategy, architecture, and management. So talking about and having internal clarity on things like data integration, migration, data quality, backups, and having not only just a clear roadmap for the Salesforce platform, but as well as any other assets that are integrating to it is super, super important. And the last one, and not the least one, is around communication. Everybody needs to be informed in your team or within your center of excellence. You need to have the right stakeholders involved right from the beginning. And you also need to be mindful of things like scope creep when you're getting everybody involved. And this kind of again ties back to why you need to have a strong vision and strategy. So clear communication on why you're doing this gives you good chances to get buy-in from everyone that's going to use the platform, and also greater adoption. So just to sum up, having a plan for all of this will take you a really long way. And now I'll talk about some of the downsides if you don't follow this, or if you don't plan to have such a process in place. And we have learned these points from our existing customers or from the community. And the first one that I want to talk about is business backlog. Again, prioritization is important. It's super important because there are so many requests, and it's difficult for us to figure out which ones to prioritize or which ones to look after. Well, one way to look at it is by just doing what is most important for the business. But the other side of it is, what if the work required to meet those requests is really, really high? So do I do that one big project which will deliver a lot of value and also take a lot of time? Or do I do that 7 small requests that are going to be done easily in a fraction of time, and probably they might deliver the same amount of value? So there's always a balance between the amount of value that your activities are giving back to the business versus the overall work required, and you need to figure out the best fit. And people keep asking questions on how do you prioritize work, or how do you determine the amount of work required? And one thing that ties back is a lot of companies practice manual impact analysis, and this is challenging and sometimes time consuming. So for changing even a simple pick list, you would not want to spend hours researching the dependencies, and simply aligning resources also to your work is tough. So you need clarity on whether this job would require a senior resource or a junior resource. So getting answer to all these questions will simplify your day-to-day life, and Strongpoint helps in few ways here by automating your impact analysis and presenting the level of risk involved in the change. The next piece is really around software development lifecycle. So no orgs are the same, and you need to have your own unique development and release strategy. And also, not all changes that we make are the same. So some might need a finer lens of change control, whereas others can just follow, a quick deploy methodology. So what I mean here is, again, not every change has to go through the regular CI/CD approach using high-skilled resources. Some can follow a quick deploy route, and again, there's no question that methodologies need to be aligned. We need to follow best practices, but there's absolutely room here to be more flexible and be more responsive to the business. And this is also really a great way to maximize the use of your technical resources. Now, the next one is around data strategy and architecture. Now, Strongpoint doesn't necessarily play a big part in the architecture space, but the challenge that we see is really common. So when presented, again, to anybody with a request to make a change, someone has three options in front of them. You can either choose to delete something, you can either choose to modify something, or you can either choose to create something new. And generally, people don't delete things because it's dangerous, and impact analysis, if done manually, is time consuming. So maybe they think about modifying it, but again, modifying is dangerous too, because till the time you know the dependencies, you can't really figure out whether this change or whether this modification will be less risky or not. So a lot of times people tend to create new things, and this is what leads to technical debt. So especially for orgs that are old, we are seeing this increasingly being a challenge. So too many fields on a layout, unused objects, reports, all of this impacts the overall user adoption and health of your system. And we at Strongpoint have a variety of ways to help here, and cleanup is actually one of those. So those were the three areas that I mainly wanted to cover. But there's just one more thing before we actually jump into the demo, and it's reporting. A strong governance strategy also, in my opinion, needs to be closed loop in nature. So what I mean here is you need to be monitoring for exceptions. Sorry. And when I say exceptions, these are things related to mistakes or human errors. So for companies that are struggling with IT audits, what we often see that teams are spending a lot of time to manually review change logs or manually review audit logs and manually reconciling them to the exact change in the system. And at Strongpoint, we help automate a lot of this. And also, kind of proud to mention here that Salesforce recommends us in their recent SOX compliance report under the change management category, highlighting some of the areas that I just described. So not taking any more time, and in case you're tired of my boring slides and voice, I'll just pass it over to Rick, and he'll show you a quick demo of some of the things we just discussed.
Thank you, Simranjeet. And there we go. All right. So I'm going to show you some of the highlights of the Strongpoint product. It will loosely follow the same organization of the points that Simranjeet outlined. The foundation of the Strongpoint product is the documentation of all of the metadata in your org, and in the kind of illustration of dependencies among that metadata. So I'm starting first with our dependency relationship diagram. And I'm showing here a custom field on the account object, which is the company social media field. And you can see that it's used on a few page layouts and 2 reports. Not too many dependencies for this pick list. However, if you look at another custom field, which is also a pick list, the maintenance type, you can see that it's used in an Apex class and a few different workflows and approval processes. It's also used on some reports. Some of these look like they may be important to the finance organization. For example, the high value customer reports. So for fields like this that have a larger number of dependencies, you can focus your efforts on understanding the impacts of those. And that gets back to one of the latter slides that Simranjit showed about prioritization being the art of optimizing the business value when weighing it against the work required. So with our dependency analysis and impact analysis, you can get a good sense of how much work might be required based on dependencies. I'm now showing a different view. Because Strongpoint is on platform, you have all of the same reporting capabilities that you have with any other Salesforce objects. So this is a standard report that we have called the Customization Impact Report. The data here is the same data that we saw previously in the dependency relationship diagram, but this is just a report view that can be exported to Excel or however you normally would delve into this deeper. Let's see, here's the maintenance type field that we saw, and you see the same dependencies here just laid out in a report format. If we scroll down a little bit more, there's a number of custom fields here that appear to have no dependencies or few dependencies. And so these would be safer to look at. And I wanted to, sorry, so these links go back to the Strongpoint customization record. So for every metadata type, we document a lot of information about that particular item. So this is the documentation record for this discount code field. There's a lot of information here. There's more information on these tabs that I will not go into. The DRD is available on the customization record. Here you see, again, the reports that they're used in, a couple of Apex classes, another workflow and approval process. And another feature of the DRD is that as you click on these things, you can drill down. So if you're interested in what else this account controller class depends on, you can see, there's all the fields that are referenced. It actually launches a workflow, or I'm sorry, an approval process as part of this class. So it gives you a lot of information about that. I'm going to show another customization record because I'm going to follow up on this in one of the last parts of the demo. This is another custom field on the opportunity object called commission rate greater than 40%. And I wanted to point out that for this particular customization under this controls tab, we have this flagged as a control. So a control is something that's defined by you. It can be a financial control. It can be some kind of an audit control. It's kind of whatever you want it to be. But it's flagged as a very special field. And in this particular org, anything that's flagged as a control requires a change request in order to be compliant, to make it a compliant change. The change request, which you're seeing now, is really the core of Strongpoint's governance capabilities. So the the change request basically is the glue between all of the documentation information about particular customizations and the changes to those customizations, which I'll show you on the next tab. On the change request, you're able to list customizations that you want to change. Here, it's the same two fields that we saw in the first DRD dependency relationship diagram demo. Part of the change request is an embedded approval process, which is pretty, it can be as complex as you need it to be. I'm showing here the impact analysis tab, which again is kind of a different view of the dependencies. So you can see that the maintenance type is related to all of these different customizations. It's flagged as something that cannot be safely deleted or modified for these reasons. It's been recently used. It's used in Apex classes. It's used in workflows and so forth. So this is a different view that helps you get a sense of how complex something is going to be to change. Once a change is made, the Strongpoint scanners scan your orgs typically on a nightly basis and look for any changes to metadata. Any changes are, all changes that we identify are cataloged in a change log record. This is a list view, excuse me, that shows recent changes in this test org that I'm looking at. And what I wanted to point out is that we have a compliance indicator. So green means it's compliant, red means it's not compliant. In this particular org, we have a policy set up such that any report changes are automatically compliant, right? So we're logging the change to the report, but because it's a report and we've set this policy, we're saying that, that everything is just fine, except for the report that we looked at a few minutes ago called the commission rate greater than 40% report. This change has been flagged as non-compliant, even though it's a report and the standard report default is everything's fine. Recall that this was a controlled report by setting that flag. And so therefore that report requires a change request. And because it doesn't find a change request that's been approved, it marks it as non-compliant. You have the ability to set up many different policies depending on your business needs. Here's another example of a report, the customer retention report, which is associated with a financial changes policy. And according to that policy, any metadata that falls under that policy requires a change request. And because there's not a change request, it's flagged as non-compliant. So that gives you kind of a flavor of what we can do. Just to close out, the standard package comes with a number of canned reports that are specifically designed to help you implement and manage a pretty streamlined governance process. Most of our customers, after a few months when they've established a good cadence, they can really just focus on the reports that are highlighting the non-compliant changes, which once everyone's trained, those become fewer and fewer, and your governance process can focus on that. Auditors are happy, management's happy, you're happy, we're all happy. And that's all I have for today. So we can open it up for questions, if anybody has any.
You all can post in the Q&A section or on the chat window. So we have a question, and the question is, does this work similar for NGO? So if your question is about the NPSP package, then yes, we have a lot of customers who are nonprofits, and they are using our entire documentation tool and every other functionality that we have described. Some of them we have covered today, but there's a lot more. So yes, it does work with NPSP package. There's one more question, Rick, and I'll let you answer that. Can we export the documentation?
So in general, the answer is yes, because the document, the metadata documentation for both the customizations themselves and for the customization dependencies are stored in two custom objects that come with the package, and both of those can be reported on. So the standard reports that we ship are basically just Salesforce reports and list views against those custom objects. So you can use those, you can create your own custom reports, and all of that data can be exported just like any other custom object data.
Okay, thanks, Rick. There's one more question, and I think I can take that up. And I request everyone, I know we are over time, but then we will be here for another 5 to 10 minutes. And if you have any questions, you can keep answering them. But there's one question on how is the product licensed and priced. We have 3 different tiers to offer. And some of the functionality that you saw today, and I hope you'll be able to relate to that. So the first tier is around documentation and optimization. So it covers everything from our documentation engine to automated change logs, cleanup, and some other admin related tools. And that's our first tier. And then our second tier is around change management. So you saw things on change request, impact analysis, and environment compare. That's part of change management. And then enterprise compliance is more around SOX compliance and integration with Jira or ServiceNow if somebody wants that. So it comes with some additional functionality. So there are 3 different tiers depending upon your requirements, and that's how we price. And if there's any request specifically on price, I'm happy to get in touch. You can drop us an email, reach out to our website, come on chat, and then we'll be happy to answer. Rick, there's a technical question, and I'll let you answer that. Does it hit the API limit on the org to create all of this information? I'm wondering, how does it impact a big org with thousands of users and interactions? So before you just open up, Rick, I just want to hint here. So Strongpoint is being used at different sizes of org, and the largest one that we have has around 40,000 users, all built on platform, and we have not seen such a concern yet. But Rick, from a technical standpoint, I'll let you counter this question.
Sure. So I'm going to answer it in kind of in reverse order. So once everything has been documented, the API usage is relatively low because the nightly scans are only looking for changes to the metadata that occurred that day. The initial scan is of course is comprehensive, and you're going from 0 to something large, and so that scan tends to be spread over several days. And we do that in order to manage both API limits and other governor limits. But once the initial scan is completed, the impact on the org is pretty low.
Okay, I hope that answered your question. If you have any follow-up to that, you can post it again and then Rick will answer. But more or less, I think no more questions for now. But yeah, we'll be here for another minute or two. If you have any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, you can always come back to our website, strongpoint.io, reach out to us, and then we'll be happy to schedule something in person and custom for you based on your requirements, and then we can show you a custom demo, end-to-end demo of Strongpoint. But otherwise, I hope that you all stay safe in these challenging times. I think there's one question. How much professional service is required to install? So our pricing comes along with setup and support fee. Generally, from your side, it requires only being on calls and helping us understand your goals and expectations. So if you decide to move ahead, you will have one of our customer success rep that'll be aligned directly to work with you, and they will start right from your basic requirements, your goals, and then depending on your overall requirement, it could take about 4 to 5 hours from your side to 10 to 15 hours if we are doing like a full-blown project, including Jira and ServiceNow integration. So this is the total time that you will spend, not in one go, but let's say in a month or two. So there's one more question where the question is around if you can review our definition of governance and what your approach is. The webinar is actually recorded, so we will send this out to all of you either today or tomorrow, so that you can look at it again. If there are still any open questions, I'll be happy to chat, or one of our technical resources will be happy to chat, to give you further clarity. I hope that's fine. Yes, we did define it in the beginning. We defined some of the areas that Strongpoint can help you address. Part of it was covered in the demo, but I think you will find the answers when you see the recording. And thanks for all the positive comments. Thank you so much. I still see people on here, so if there are still any more questions, we are still available, and we can answer any further questions. Otherwise, I hope you all stay safe and happy work from home.